Hello. Today I am going to talk about the idea of wit as found in Restoration Comedy, particularly The Man of Mood. Wit, as you know, is a very significant factor when we are talking about this kind of theatre, when we are talking about this kind of repartee that we have become familiar with when we talk about this particular kind of comedy, because that wit is one of the mainstays, one of the main attractions which drew in the crowds at that time and which is still significant for us. And this wit and the humor that we have here is not quite the traditional humor or the traditional kind of wit, in the sense that if you go back to Shakespearean times, you see a different kind of a wit, a more stricter emphasis on wordplay, an emphasis on ideas which somehow relate to the themes and plots and subplots, and some elements of pure good fun. That is very much there in Shakespearean, some of Elizabethan plays. Ben Jonson is, of course, a very different kind of a wit, who is much more darker, let me say, much more cynical, much more critical of what is happening all around, because he is essentially focusing on vices, whereas Shakespeare is celebrating certain comic elements, and even the romantic comedies, which might be emotionally more non-comic, emotionally more pushing towards sometimes a kind of pathos which we overcome, which the characters overcome. But the element of fun is different. The element of appealing to the crowds, connecting to the crowds through humor is very different. But when we come to the Restoration theatre, as you know, the element of licentiousness is higher. The social reality that we are looking at is, as some people say, more faithfully represented. So such elements are naturally not conducive to light-hearted fun, not quite allowing the kind of banter or the kind of innocence that you might find in some Shakespearean light-hearted comedies. But here, each and every dialogue is loaded either with cynicism or with strategy, intrigue, or the word play that we have, not word play but the expressions that we have, are constructed from a different point of view altogether. The idea is that wit becomes this weapon, as if you are fencing with words, and there are several classifications. You know about the classifications within the aristocracy, within the gentility, but within the genteel society. But here what we have is a wit-based classification as well. There are clusters of characters who belong to the same category of wit. And these characters, they have their own sphere. They have their own coterie, which is defined by this wit. And what you need to be aware of is that the kind of wit that we are talking about here is, well, neoclassic, of course. Restoration borrowed from, influenced by Molière to a great extent. And what we have is this quest for elegance, that the verbal expressions, the command over language, would be presented through elegant expressions. That elegance becomes very important, and the mellifluousness, the sweetness, the sound, all these would be very important. There has to be this veneer of sophistication. You cannot have rustic expressions. You cannot have that kind of language which might invite satire, derision. You cannot have that. What you have to have is this resonant but somewhat mechanical kind of language. Mechanical in the sense that it has a purpose. It's not just for the sake of language or for the sake of fun, but because they are constructed, sometimes rehearsed. These people, like their clothing, they also practice and rehearse and put a lot of time in the language that they will be presenting in the external environment, in the society that they will be visiting. So that would be a very significant point, because they would have to speak well. Speaking well is a primary criterion. If you do not speak well, then you will find yourself in the backwaters of the society that you belong to. Belonging is a very problematic concept here, because they have to do a lot of things in order to belong. If somebody is very comfortable being in those backwaters, then it's good for him. We have characters like that, young Belair perhaps. I will come back to him in a few moments. So they would not be engaging in this game of linguistic one-upmanship, this linguistic jugglery, even linguistic fencing, this the term touche, when somebody says something which you cannot counter anymore, which is the last bit of hit. So that kind of a language-based competition is common here. And you will see how they use language, how they modify language, how they manipulate language. Particularly when you think about Doraemon's interactions with Mrs. Lovett, and you see what kind of language is being employed here. It's an employment of language. It's not coming naturally. It's not the natural expression of a person's feeling, but this is completely weaponized language. So that is very important. And what is most important is that the complete lack of poetry or the poetic elements. You will naturally counter here, because you will see Doraemon is always quoting poetry. And that is a very significant point in understanding the play, because he is always quoting poetry, he is borrowing poetry, he is using poetry, because he has none of his own, not even in his emotions. In Shakespeare, when people got emotional, they spoke in poetry. Even witty expressions are there, even a lot of humor can be found in those poetic expressions. But here that naturalness of poetry is completely gone, because none of these characters, this is Etheridge being very conscious, none of these characters have any poetry in them. It is not giving them any poetry because they don't have that kind of sincerity or that kind of emotional strength. They are so used to playing games that they have, the only thing that they have is the words, which are most often insincere. And even when they try to be sincere, it becomes difficult because that kind of wit is not there in them. Their wit is all about superficiality. It's all about, as I keep telling you, strategy. It's all about this competition. So they practically do not know how to be sincere. Right? And those who are sincere often end up making fools of themselves. Those who try to seem like the wits, they also make these, they become the gulls who are constantly ridiculed. And you know, there is this idea of entitlement here. Because all these upper class people, whether they have wit or not, and even if they have wit, they utilize that wit in satirizing the lower classes, if not each other. Not satirizing per se, abusing the lower classes. They call their servants all kinds of names. They do not even consider these servants to be at least as human as they are. They are often thought of as subhuman. The flower girl, the shoemaker, the footman, the people who carry those chairs. So they are all thought to be lesser human beings. And they do not stop from using abusive language. And again, vermin and sot, and you just take a look at the text and you will find so many examples. Sometimes they come back, because particularly when I think the shoemaker is being told that certain vices belong to the aristocracy, then the shoemaker retorts that yes, the aristocracy will take all vices and leave nothing for us. So that becomes a very significant point. Even somebody like Sir Fopling Flutter, whom we are laughing at, even he is looking at a name of a footman and he is terribly upset that English people have such unimaginative names. So they all try to establish their superiority through what they consider to be witty. Wit is not always comedic, wit is not always funny. Wit is in that verbal fencing, wit is there in that constant attempt to introduce and to maintain one's superiority. So that becomes very important. And as you know, there is this hierarchy, this clustering which I mentioned a few moments earlier. There is this idea of wit-based clustering. Of course, within the aristocracy, the wit does not go beyond, and it does not allow people of non-aristocratic backgrounds to come closer or anything, even if they have wit, which like somebody like the shoemaker seems to have enough of. They have that wit, but they will not be allowed because simply they are working class, they are poor people, they are not even worthy of being so-called human. And this whole idea of wit, this whole idea of this wit plus language kind of a structure, that brings me to this idea of what was known as libertine language. Libertine language. libertine language is essentially a kind of index, a kind of register in which some people speak in similar expressions. Their metaphors, their similes, their references, their whole style of presentation would be the same. And there would be many clusters like this. Each cluster will have their own kind of register, not the register perhaps, but their own kind of index. These multiple indices would point to multiple clusters. So one cluster, we see one cluster here with Dorimond, Medley, even the others, other gentlemen who are there in this particular social group, this particular social group that we see in the play. So, including the ladies. So we have that. They share this one kind of linguistic specialization, right? And this libertine language, this is one part of that libertine language. The libertine language is the entire block. All these people speak in that kind of a language, but the metaphors would be similar but not the same. Each group would have its own separate metaphors and the other elements that I just mentioned. So they will have that, and these particular libertine language, as it is called by some critics, not all, some do call it this. So this libertine language will then create these clusters and help people to be attached to a certain cluster, and others would understand them clearly, but the outsiders will not understand what they are speaking if they are making fun of somebody, or if they are accepting, they are not the accepting sort, but if they are showing respect or making fun, it's very difficult to understand unless you are an insider. It happens in all groups, in all friend circles and everything. But in this particular case, this is a significant social construction of groups, of coteries, as I have said. So this conversational equality, so people who are capable of having one kind of conversational skill, they will club together. They will have enough wit to maintain that kind of conversation. They will have enough wit to know when they should stop or when they should continue, who to make fun of, to whom they should have a lot of reverence, for whom they should have a lot of reverence, and so on and so forth. So that creates their, not only their group, but also it creates this arena in which they can flaunt their command over this language, in which they can show how skilled they are in this libertine language. And this libertine language would be something that would be completely devoid of sincerity. It would be something that would be about strategies and gameplays and stuff like that. It will not be anything greater, it will not be anything more. It will limit them within their superficial, insincere boundaries. So, in a way, it gives them an identity, but that identity remains limited and limiting, and they will not be able to make themselves free of this. When you go to Congreve, most of you have already studied Congreve, at least the way of the world, you would see there is a constant attempt to go beyond this kind of language, this kind of wit. Mirabell and Melamont are special because they are trying to go beyond. When you read She Stoops to Conquer, you will see they are not remaining within that language, how inadequate that language is in proper human interaction. That is what they will be showing, that is what they will be presenting, and that becomes very, very relevant. But here in manner of mode, Etheridge is consciously limiting these characters, commenting indirectly, obliquely, on their lack of human warmth. And human warmth is not something that you get as such in the play. As you know, as you have felt, that they are all about these conquests, and these conquests are all about strategies, all about games, and all about moving on to the next one, in the process destroying the earlier one, not caring about the reputation or dignity or feelings, pure and simple feelings of somebody. And it's not only that that Dorimant is doing that, it's something that people keep on doing to each other. And that is the way of the world that Congreve would be speaking about later on, try to comment on that. But the men of mode here would engage entirely in that. And if you think about it, when Sir Fopling Flutter enters the stage, your entire attention goes to him, not only because the way he is dressed, he is visually also become, he will always become the center of attraction because of his outlandish attire, but linguistically as well, you will see that he is a non-wit. Something that he does not know, because his standard of wit is different, almost absent. He is a non-wit. Compared to the others here, he is a non-wit, but the others pretend to give him enough significance. They actually pretend to pay him a lot of attention because they are making fun of him. And the more attention Sir Fopling Flutter gets, the more he makes a fool of himself. And the others enjoy that. The so-called wits, they enjoy this. They tell Sir Fopling that Sir Fopling is a wit and encourage him to speak, to act, and they thoroughly enjoy it. So this is the kind of meanness that you already have noticed. And these wits, it's not a genial, gentle kind of a wit, but it's a very vicious, very harmful, attacking kind of wit. So they have their fun at the cost of this man who is begging to be made fun of. So, but what Dorimant does, Sir Fopling will come in, he will speak some kind of nonsense, something which does not at all seem funny. Funny because it's not funny. Funny because he thinks it's funny, but it's not. So you can laugh at him. That's how he is constructed. His idea of linguistic skill is very different from the idea of the others. But Dorimant, whenever he enters the stage, he also tries to take control. And this is within the on-stage reality as well as when we are looking at him from the point of view of the audience. He comes in, he will try to establish his superiority through his use of wit, which is sanctioned, which is the libertine language, which is recognized, and which locates him as a part of this group. And by doing that, he will present Sir Fopling as the outsider, because the language, there would be two language registers functioning simultaneously, and they are not the same. So what Dorimant and company would be talking about, Sir Fopling will not completely understand. Sir Fopling would misunderstand, because that is the intention to make him misunderstand and make him understand wrongly, so that he keeps on making a fool of himself. And they are completely successful in that, but Dorimant is not always successful in his own strategies, in his own juggleries. He is not always successful. And that is a very significant point that Etheridge is making here. This is something that you need to remember, because as I keep telling you, that Dorimant is not the ideal ultimate hero. Etheridge is not giving us that. Dorimant is human. His frailties are recognizable. His flaws are very much there. And he does not have the skill of winning over all situations with his wit. He does not. He is not given that kind of skill. So it is a very interesting kind of construction when the hero is not the complete total hero, but the hero is rather human. The hero becomes the accurate portrayal of the contemporary successes and failures of the so-called rakes. So that is very important. Although Dorimant employs all the three elements that we essentially see in this wheat-based dialogue, right? On the one hand, through his dialogue, what Sir Fopling manages to create is negative impression. You do not have a positive kind of feeling about him. When you look at him, you kind of think in negative terms. He is funny, he is not influential, he is funny not because he is trying to be funny. He is funny unconsciously, and that's the worst possible thing one can be. And through his dialogue, he tries to employ the tricks, but he fails to do so. Something that Dorimant sometimes successfully does. In dialogue, what do? You either rail at somebody, right? You rail at somebody, you attack somebody with your wit, or you dissemble, you lie, you are not honest, or you have that kind of what was known as plain dealing, speaking your mind, almost confessing. So you can employ any of these three strategies when you are speaking, because through railing would include this kind of verbal violence which would target the others, and it would mean that the person who is railing is trying to establish his or her superiority. So it's an out and out attempt. That railing can be witty, it can be biting, it can be satirical, it can be violent, but you need to have a kind of wit in order to win when you are railing. Dorimant does not always win, right? Even when he is dissembling, when he is using lies, falsehoods, he does not always succeed because he is not an expert. It's not because he is a good human being. It's not because of that. It's because he is not a good human being. He is not skilled enough. He does not have enough sincerity. So he keeps on dissembling. That's what Dorimant does essentially. He keeps on dissembling, he keeps on planning, deceiving, lying, but quite often he is caught. And it's not always comfortable for him. Right? This is vital, this is very important. And when somebody confesses that, right, I am a bad person, this is what I have been doing, then the opponent is taken aback, because the expectation is that this person will deny whatever he has been doing. But that kind of confession is often used, that kind of plain dealing, the plain dealer, if you remember. That kind of plain dealing would be very difficult to fight, and somebody can establish a language-based superiority through plain dealing as well. Somebody who is always pretending to be honest, at least being partially honest, or for that time being confessional, agreeing to all his crimes or deceptions. And you can't really fight such a thing, because then you think of that person as honest, right? So, and in many ways, some critics say that it is Medley who is the ultimate witty character in this play, because he is the smartest. He has distance enough. He involves himself only when he sees that he is in command, he is in control of a situation. Otherwise, he does not engage. He remains aloof. He observes, he comments, but he is not a part of this story, a story in which there is every possibility of losing. Whereas Dorimont tries to be, as some people have thought, that he tries to be this kind of sprezzatura figure. Right. This sprezzatura is a concept in which we see somebody who is effortlessly elegant, who does not have to dissemble or try, and who does not put a lot of time or money into seeming elegant, or who is not really careful, who does not care to be seen as something stylish, fashionable, aristocratic, but automatically becomes so. That is what Dorimont tries to be. But he has to put a lot of effort into it, and we see him failing again and again. He does not have that nonchalance. He does not have that kind of carelessness that nothing will bother him. It's not like that. We see him getting bothered. We see him getting flustered. And we see how whenever his strategies fail, he is sometimes put out of place. He can't really cope with those times when his ploys are not successful, that he has to concede or accept defeat. So he tries, but he tries too hard, and in that trial he fails to be that sprezzatura figure. He completely fails, because he might want to be somebody like that, but he cannot be. And for instance, when Sir Fopling and Mrs. Lovett speak, Dorimont had thought that this would have a different outcome, and his response to it is not one of casual indifference. He becomes anxious, he responds, he reacts, and those are things that a gentleman is not supposed to do in this particular society. So all that is happening, and in fact the other fascinating scene is when he is caught out with Mrs. Lovett, Belinda and Harriet all together, and he is found there, and the situation is completely goes out of hand. It's Act 5, Scene 2, I think. And if you look at it, you will see Dorimont is at a loss. For a while at least, he is at a loss. He tries to wear masks. He tries to pretend to be somebody else. He uses all the tricks in the trade. But more often than not, they fail. The ultimate success is there, but he keeps on failing. If you think about the other characters, particularly young Belair, and you see that he belongs to that particular group. He's a part of that particular group, but he is not a practitioner. He is this silent part. And in fact, Dorimant even thinks that he will get him married to the girl so that he can seduce the girl later on. A married woman is easier to seduce. So in a way, he becomes this figure whom the others would like to use. He is capable of understanding this wit. He has enough wit to understand what is going on, but he does not employ that wit. He is, in a way, more sincere than any other character in the play, and so he becomes a kind of a question mark. Where do you locate him? Is he a part of that particular libertine language, or is he also a spectator? He might not be an outsider, but he is a spectator who sees, understands, but does not participate, because participation would turn him into somebody like Dorimant or Medley. So he does not. And among the women, you see, even the women, the female characters, the female figures, they also have enough wit to understand what is going on, at least partially. Emilia understands everything to a certain extent. In fact, old Belair, who speaks in what one might call, even some critics call it the rival language. It's the opposite of the libertine language. And she understands what is going on, and she deals with it to a certain extent. So she is located in that part where she can recognize libertine language and libertine actions, and she can deal with them, she can negotiate with them in that manner. Whereas somebody like Belinda, perhaps, she partially understands it, but her judgment is clouded, and she thinks that she can go through that, she can manage that, and she can almost become Harriet. But she fails because she is also manipulated, whereas Harriet succeeds, she fails, and she does not have a very gentle kind of end here. She has to face hardships as well. So Dorimant's libertine ideas, she partially sees through them. She is supposed to see more, but she fails because there is this kind of sincerity in her which makes her oblivious, which gives her some faith that Dorimant might be honest somehow, etc. And you know the story. So it's not a good end for a lady that we have here. So, Belinda and Lovett, they reject each other. They have these painful denouements, and it absolutely proves that they are not within that particular circle of wit in which they can actually recognize fully how that kind of language and that kind of wit, which is very harmful, which is actually planning the downfall of these women, they function, they do not understand it fully. Whereas Harriet to a large extent does, and that is why she has this special location. You know, if you think about it, as I keep telling you, Dorimont is not really the ultimate restoration hero, because he cannot get out of all these situations. He is often he is often caught, he is often found short in terms of these witty escapades, the witty escapes that you expect from such characters. He is found short. And in a way, he and Sir Fopling Flutter are kind of opposites but similar. They are obsessed with similar superficial ideas. Just the fact that Sir Fopling Flutter has a different location, he has failed to dislocate and relocate himself within this kind of witty society, this kind of witty coterie. He has failed to do that. He has brought his baggage and he has been using it. He has this idea that that would be enough. But otherwise, they are very similar. Their aims, their goals, their expressions, the registers are different, but they are basically the same people. So they are almost similar, and that is where Etheridge is so special, because the so-called hero and the so-called opposition, they are shown to be almost the same, but belonging to just different cultures. And the fun and the ridicule comes in when these two cultures collide, when these two fashions collide. One fashion is thought to be unacceptable, whereas the other is acceptable, but the other fails to be completely fashionable. So it's a very interesting thing. In fact, Wycherley would be much more vitreous. He would take this idea of libertinism to a different height. He will be much more biting, much more, his intrigues would be much more vicious is the only term that I can think of. Right. But Etheridge still keeps us in this level in which there is this kind of humanity failing. And we see this world and we see the flaws, not only the wit, but the shortcomings within that wit as well. I will end here. Thank you.